I'm the Godless Engineer, and today I am talking with Hemant Mehta, the friendly atheist, because we are both going to the Mythinformation Conference up in Milwaukee on April 25th, and I thought it would be a good idea to kind of do some small interviews and kind of let you guys know what he's going to be talking about up there, because as you know, I'm going to be streaming live from the event. So I know Hemant will just be pleased to talk to me at the event as well. Hey Hemant, how's it going?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks, John.
Yeah. Uh, it's a really good getting to talk to you before the conference because I'm really ecstatic to hear your particular talk. What's your talk going to be about exactly?
Sure. The plan is to talk about how atheists, we think we're so good at critical thinking and we think we're so good at sussing out bad information. And it turns out we're just as susceptible to falling for bullshit as so many other people. And I think it's important we recognize that. Why is it that we fall for this stuff? How do we prevent ourselves from being tricked as well? So I'll give examples of what I'm talking about and kind of see if there's any way to work around that.
Okay, cool. Can you give us kind of an example, maybe, of one particular thing that atheists generally don't do their background research on?
Sure. Here's probably the most famous example I could think of. I'm sure a lot of your viewers have heard this saying of George H.W. Bush saying that atheists should not be considered citizens. Like that's one of those quotations that's floated around online for so long. And the question that we should be asking is, well, did he actually say that? Because there's no video of that, there's no recording of that, and actually the whole story stemmed from one reporter for the Chicago Tribune who happened to be who is an atheist, and a pretty vocal one at that, who said he asked George Bush the question. That's what George H.W. Bush told him, and there you go. So I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I'm like, if a Christian said, Barack Obama said Christians shouldn't be citizens, don't you think there would be more skepticism about whether or not he did that? We'd be looking for evidence. We'd be looking for that information, some sort of proof about it. And yet, when it kind of appeals to something that kind of fits our stereotypes, that goes out the window? And that's the sort of thing I'm talking about.
Very interesting. Like I said again, I can't wait for your talk up in Milwaukee. In the recent past, I've kind of been labeled an ultra skeptic for even questioning Jesus's existence.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of curious. Like, do you feel that there's any certain point where skepticism can go too far, or anything like that?
Um, I'm open to, if you say Jesus doesn't exist, my reaction is going to be, okay, convince me. I want to hear your argument for it. I don't think skepticism can go too far, but I do think it can be. You got to understand that when we talk about this stuff, it's not enough to just give arguments. I'll give you an example of what I mean. I could convince someone that uh, this thing that they believe deeply in, their heartfelt religious beliefs, I could argue that they are completely untrue. But there's got to be a human side to this thing that kind of, how do I say this? It's not enough for me to just say, here's why you shouldn't believe in God. I have to understand why they believe in God. It's not because of logical arguments, it's because of an emotional connection to it. And I think sometimes skeptics can almost be heartless or emotionless in that sense, where we think, okay, well, this is just bullshit. So I'm going to explain why it's bullshit. And instead of that convincing someone to drop their belief in it, they just cling to it even harder because, logic doesn't sway them. So we have to find other ways of getting through to them. So it's not that skepticism can go too far, but that we need more than skepticism if we want to convince people to drop their faith in things that they shouldn't believe in. I hope that makes sense.
Oh yeah, it totally does. Um, I'm just kind of curious. What is your position on historical Jesus?
You know, uh, so to be honest with you, I wasn't raised Christian, and Jesus is, in terms of my disbelief in God, Jesus was kind of irrelevant. So I hate to say it, but it's almost a I don't care approach to the question. If he did exist, I don't think he did the miracles attributed to him. If he didn't exist, that really wouldn't change my feelings about Christianity at all. So it's a non-factor for me. So I know, for example, Richard Carrier has argued against the living Jesus as an actual person. I know there have been scholars who have debated this one way or the other. I don't have anyone in the game right now. I don't have a player in the game. I don't have a horse in the race, so I could care less which way that goes. And it's honestly not something I think about on a regular basis. So my position would be one of I don't care, and I'm not well informed enough to make a decision one way or the other.
Fair enough. I know that um, when I first came out of religion, I had shucked the God belief, but then there were still a few things I was like, yeah, that's probably historical. But then
Right.
when I like delved into it a little bit more, like for instance, Noah and the flood, I didn't think
Yeah.
that the worldwide flood had happened or that Noah put the things on the ark, but I thought, well, maybe some kind of big flood happened or whatnot. And then when I started going into it deeper, I've heard multiple ideas about what the flood could represent in the Bible, but for the most part, yeah, I hadn't even thought to even question it.
Yeah, exactly. And so that I mean that's what I want to see. I want to see people questioning this stuff. I like that people are digging into the historicity of Jesus because I think that's an important thing to figure out with whatever information we could use. So more power to the people studying it, but it wouldn't mean anything one way or the other because even if he really was a living, breathing person, that still doesn't mean he did all the miracles attributed to him or that, it's proof of God's existence or that he came, from a virgin mother or anything like that.
So, what do you think? Like, if mythicism became like a more, I guess, mainstream belief, whereas the population was mostly starting to believe it, what kind of effect do you think that would have, like, on our government and whatnot?
If people stop believing in the myths,
Yes.
um, I wish I could say they would take that approach, that critical thinking approach, in so many of the other things they do. I don't know that they would. Um, Again, we figured this out after watching these people for a long time. It's like whack-a-mole. Like you might think they're okay on one issue, but then another issue they take a weird stance on. So they might be good on science, but then they do something silly when it comes to women's rights. Very few politicians are good on all of these issues. So I wish I could say that, if they, even if you had a government that was full of atheists, I guess what I'm saying, you would still have a lot of bullshit in government.
Oh, so you mean that if all atheists were in office, we wouldn't turn out to be some kind of genocidal maniac?
Yeah, no, I don't think that would be the case, but I don't think it would be this. It's not like everything would be perfect and harmonious if you had, again, because we've seen plenty of examples. Just because you're a good critical thinker when it comes to God's existence, it doesn't mean you apply those skills everywhere else in your life.
I completely believe that.
Yeah,
I've got a Facebook group that's right around the 10,000 mark, and I've just
yeah,
seen just about every flavor of person come through there, like personality wise. Uh,
yeah. And
what?
in my opinion, when it comes to those people, the approach I take is, look, if it's just one crazy person, I don't really care. If it turns out it's symptomatic of something bigger, and I'll give you an example, there are atheists who are firmly pro-life, and it's not just one person; it's a sizable number of them. Now I want to know what's going on in their heads. I want to know what they're thinking and why they hold these positions because they seem to be antithetical to everything I hold true. Especially if you don't have a religious argument, then how could you possibly, be anti-choice? And so now I'm interested. Now I want to know what they're thinking. So, I've done things like, here, give me your best arguments for why we should be pro-life. because I have a feeling that you're going to get ripped apart in the comment threads on my website, and that's exactly how it played out. But that's kind of my approach to it. I'll give you enough rope and let's see if you end up hanging yourself. And that
Yeah,
that upsets a lot of people because they say I'm giving a platform to these people who hold these horrible beliefs. But again, I don't think you can ignore them. I think if it's a sizable number of people, you have to address their beliefs head on.
yeah, I totally agree, and I think that we're starting to see a lot more now, like just the general public, rejecting a lot of the older ideas that we want to be pushed out of our social normity, I guess.
Yeah,
So I think in general we're starting to move towards that area of more acceptance rather than however the Christians or whatever particular religious group want to make it out to be.
yeah,
Um, Recently, like a few months back, David Silverman had said that if you're a good skeptic, then you'll eventually turn atheist, or a good
yeah,
application of skepticism always leads to atheism. I think is more along the lines of what he said, and I'm just
yeah.
kind of curious. Do you agree with that or disagree?
Um, I mean, I want to believe him. I think that should be true, but I know it's not. I mean, there are people, I mean, plenty of religious people will tell you they are critical thinkers, that they are skeptics on a lot of things, and they clearly hold these beliefs that we would think are not very critical at all. So, practically speaking, that's not what happens. But yeah, I think in an ideal world, uh, in an ideal world, if everyone thought critically, they would think exactly like I do. And that's not how the world works. So,
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree with that. Are you excited to hear either of the other two speakers that are going to be at the conference?
yeah, I am. James Kirkwall is a guy I know from Chicago, so it's always interesting to hear what he has to say. And it's been a long time since I've heard Richard Carrier speak, so I'm interested in hearing his arguments, kind of for against a historical Jesus.
Yeah, I haven't read any of James Kirkwall yet, but I have read a couple of things by Carrier, and I'm actually using his books along with a few others for. I've got a series on my channel called "Did Jesus Exist?" where I kind of examine the
Yeah,
evidence, against the historical Jesus. And Carrier's one of the books. A couple of his books are the ones that I'm using for that series that I'm drawing my information from. So I'm
yeah,
really excited to see both of these guys. So
absolutely.
yeah, I don't know like who else is gonna be there. Do you know if do you know anybody that's gonna be there other than
You
me,
know,
obviously?
I've spoken to some of the Milwaukee people, so I know a lot of the people who are part of those groups, and they're fantastic. It's a thriving, atheist network they have going there in Milwaukee, which is awesome. But yeah, one of the cool things about any of these places I speak at is that the everyone who every time there's a conference like this, there are people who attend it who have never been to anything like it before. They've never been surrounded by other atheists where they can kind of drop their guard. They don't have to watch what they say. They don't have to be afraid of saying something that might offend other people. And it's always exciting to meet people who this is their first time being part of some group of atheists. And I hope that that's the case here too.
Well, this after the American Atheist Conference, this one will actually be only my second conference. So I
Oh,
know
yeah,
I'm going to be one of those people.
that's awesome.
Yeah. Are you
Did
going
your
to the?
channel start right after the American Atheist Conference in Salt Lake City?
No. Or well, maybe. I started this channel at the very end of 2013. I can't remember when
Okay.
Salt Lake City was. I can't remember if
Yeah,
that
I
was.
think it was just beginning of 2014, April-ish.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, and actually, I started up my channel after my Facebook page, which had gotten to a significant amount, or at least significant for me. Um, and so that's when I started the channel and started kind of doing videos. I don't know if
Gotcha.
you, yeah, I don't know if you remember, but I remember sending you like a response video that I had done when you had raised that money for that public library. I don't
Yeah,
know if
yeah,
you
yeah,
remember
yeah.
that. Yeah, I'd made like a little ranty kind of video that was just full of obscenities because these people rejected your money. But
They
but
called it a hate group. We were a hate group.
oh yeah, that seems to really be getting around now, especially after the incident in Chapel Hill.
Yeah.
There's actually a few Facebook pages that kind of got slammed as like a hate group
Yeah,
type
and
thing.
the American Family Association today, this right-winged Christian group, they put up a map on their website that they call the bigotry map that was supposed to identify all these anti-Christian groups. And the Southern Poverty Law Center does this with hate groups, anti-gay groups, groups that say these horrible things like homosexuality is a mental illness. Things the KKK, people that hate people for things they can't change. And the American Family Association's bigotry list includes groups that are critical of Christianity or they fight for neutrality. The government needs to treat all of us equally. That's what they consider anti-Christian neutrality. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, it's interesting that they just think it's part of this is education on our parts. People assume atheism means you're immoral or that you're a bad person or you're not trustworthy. And it's up to us to convince people, like, no, that's not what it means. And so, part of the reason you're seeing all after the Chapel Hill thing, so many people pinning it on atheism is because they don't know any better. They don't know what atheism means. They just assume it's something bad. They assume that if you're an atheist and you're critical of Islam or Christianity, then killing someone who holds those beliefs is the next step, which is ludicrous. And anyone who actually, takes a couple seconds and looks into it would know how silly that is.
Yeah, I completely agree. Um, uh, for some reason I started thinking, how do you feel about Klingenschmitt getting voted into political office?
Right. So this guy, I think he's in Colorado or something, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, he got elected to the Colorado House, I think. And this is a guy who really does believe like there's an anti-Christian conspiracy at work here, and he's just ridiculously crazy with his videos. Um, yeah, it's surprising that he got elected, but here's what that shows you. Um, I'll give him credit. He actually ran for public office. We need to give people more options. That means more atheists have to run for public office. It doesn't mean we're going to win, but it's definitely not going to happen if we don't even run. And if a crazy guy like that can win office somewhere, I mean, surely there are places in America where a good candidate who happens to be an atheist could also win. So, hats off to people like James Woods, who ran for Congress out of Arizona, I believe, and uh, people who are running for public office. We need to run too, because if that guy's going to get elected, we need some counterbalance.
Yeah, I definitely think so, especially since it seems to be a lot more prominent here lately. Like the I guess crazier end of the Christian spectrum has been making it into public office. Because I don't know if you remember, but last year Susana Tannis, she said that
Oh yeah,
um,
yeah. She's from Illinois. Yeah, I remember her.
yeah, she actually, as I hear it, she didn't get into office, but she got really really close.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she was running for, I believe, a U.S. Congress seat, and yeah, the things she said about abortion, I can't remember the specifics. Just ridiculous things in a public interview, no less. Someone who has no business making decisions on these issues, and yet she was running for office, and she was a candidate for this thing. And even if she didn't win, she could have won. You know what I mean? And again, so my question is, where are more sensible people who should be running for these seats? What can we do to get them to run? Being an atheist running for office has its own stigma, but surely there are other people who religion They're not running based on the Bible. They're running to uphold the Constitution. We need people to run for office.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I mean it. I feel like if we had more rational people in office, we wouldn't have to fight like ridiculous things like climate change. I know just here
Or at
recently.
least, yeah, at least not as many of them. I mean, again, even if you elected all these atheist to office, I don't think it would solve everything. But yeah, you would think climate change wouldn't be debated the way it is right now.
Well, yeah, because there's a senator from Oklahoma that spoke on behalf of the energy chairman, and he was sitting there like there's biblical evidence that climate just changes on its own, and there's archaeological
Right,
evidence and everything. So I
right.
think that.
But no scientific, no real scientific evidence, though.
Yeah. Well, do you think that like if a lot more people were skeptical, or nearly the entire population skeptical, do you think that it would be easier to spot the crazy ones, like Klingenschmitt and Tannis and whatnot?
Yeah, you would hope so. I think the one of the reasons these people get elected is because people don't really know all the crazy stuff they say. I don't think it's that people all agree with the crazy stuff they say. They're not uh, aware of it. So it's our job to expose it and to point out why it's wrong and to do it in a way that will actually get through to people. So if we're just isolated in our bubble, or if we just, mock people who believe it without any effort to try to get them to understand why it's wrong, it doesn't help. So we need to take that effort as well. It's because it's not enough to say this is bullshit. You have to get people to understand it and accept it as such, and that's a much harder thing to do.
Yeah. Speaking of which, uh, here recently, you had tagged me on one of your blog posts about this Christians against dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Do you think that's going a little too far on the skepticism scale, or what do you think? What do you
Well,
think that situation's about?
that's not skepticism. That's ignorance of the evidence too. I mean, and this is the problem. I don't consider that skepticism. I consider that's like this faith-based, belief system that completely ignores the evidence we have. It's symptomatic of the same problem. And again, the question is, can you talk sense into that person? And if you can't talk sense into that person, can you talk sense into the people who might be watching it? Or following that Facebook group, and that's a harder game. That's a harder thing to accomplish.
Yeah, and I don't know if you saw Aaron Ra's interview with her. There's no getting through that skull.
Yeah, I believe it. And you know what? That's the reason I get emails from Christians a lot. Some of them, you can read the email and you're like, there's nothing I could say that'll change your mind, so I don't bother responding. But there are ones who seem very sincere. If they have any questions, they want to know where I'm coming from, I will respond to them. But yeah, it's kind of picking my battles. I don't need. There's some people I would never debate because I don't think they would change their mind. That you can't just you can't keep talking to a brick wall, but you got to talk to people who are willing to listen.
Okay, so just to be clear, you are totally against even talking to Ken Ham.
You know what? I don't think you would be able to convince Ken Ham that he's wrong. His entire life depends on his beliefs being right and him believing that. But what you could do is try to get through to some of these Christians who might believe some of the things he's saying and try to convince them that he doesn't know what he's talking about. And that's hard to do, but I think that is possible. So you don't have to get through to Ken Ham. You have to get through to the people who listen to Ken Ham.
Um,
But if I were Bill Nye, and I'll tell you what, Bill Nye, when he debated Ken Ham, if you watch that debate, you could tell he's not trying to convince Ken Ham of anything because he knows he's not going to get through to him. He's talking to the audience and he's talking to the people watching on YouTube because they're the ones who might actually be more amenable to changing their minds.
Yeah, I agree, and I thought that it was kind of really insightful to see in that particular debate how Bill Nye had how they had PowerPoint presentations. Well, Bill
Yeah.
Nye just had like facts on his. Like he didn't try to pretty them up because they're facts
Right.
and they're gonna work
Right.
for him. But then Ken
You
Ham's
don't
over
need cute
there.
animation.
Yeah, yeah. Ken Ham's over there with all these animations, and it looked like he spent about 2 grand on a PowerPoint presentation. It was like, this is
Well,
gonna
what
win it.
it's the same. It's the same presentation he gives everywhere he goes. So he's been using that one for a long time. And Bill Nye has said that too. He's like, he knew exactly what Ken Ham was going to say because it never changes. There's a Christian apologist, William Lane Craig, who does debates all the time. And every atheist I know who's debated him, the question's always, what's your opponent going to say? So you can rebut it and stuff. And you always know what you're going to get with William Lane Craig because he doesn't change. He uses the same arguments, he uses the same rebuttals, and he's been doing that for a really long time. It's like you know exactly what he's going to say, but you're not worried about changing his mind. You're changing the audience's mind, hopefully.
Yeah, and in the Ken Ham Bill Nye debate, I even think Bill Nye like pretty much stated that like at the beginning of the debate. It was either the beginning or the end, where he points out that the debate is there for the audience and whatnot,
Right.
and everything. And I know I've heard it there and a few other places too. But yeah, I mean, because I know I watch the debates to see both sides of the argument and kind of decide for myself. And I've actually been
Right.
swayed on a number of issues, just watching debates like that. So,
Really.
well, yeah,
That's
I mean,
fascinating. That's good to know because you know what? If you can change your mind on it, so can the people watching like an evolution debates, and that's good.
yeah. um,
Reason for optimism.
yeah. Well, I appreciate you talking with me tonight. I know we kind of got off on some very tangenty
Oh, it's
subjects, but
fine. It's always fun.
yeah. Well, I appreciate you being here with me and talking to me about the Mythinformation Conference, and I can't wait to see you out there.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and I will see you in Milwaukee very soon. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks.